It's a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's Roy Millsy, back at the Hometown Commander, and we are back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I bring you my version 1.0 deck list for the commander in front of us on my quest to outbrew your favorite Magic channel. March of the Machine. The Aftermath is out officially, and we've got a bunch of new commanders, a bunch of new cards. A very small set, only about 50 cards. I have a gut feeling that unless you saw something you particularly wanted from this set, you're probably not going to care about the set, and that's completely fine. But I want to do as many legendary creatures that I can, see what's viable, see what might be fun. And I felt like the best way to start, the only way to start, was to go back to my Simic roots and brew on Kiora, Sovereign of the Deep. I want to try to do my best. I always generally tend to just jump right into the card by card. I want to do my best going forward to give you guys kind of a snapshot of the strategy of each of these decks that we're brewing, and then give you that off ramp if you don't want to hear that, and then get into the good stuff. Kiora says, whenever you cast a Kraken, Leviathan, Octopus, or Serpent spell from your hand, you look at the top X cards of your library. X is that spell's mana value. You may cast a spell with mana value X or less from among them without paying its mana cost, but the rest on the bottom are your library in any order. Okay, so we care about this sea monster style of creatures, Leviathans, Krakens, Octopi, or Serpents. Okay, so whenever we cast one of them, we get to kind of cascade for another spell, as long as it's less than that of that creature. This is really, I think, a great upside for a deck like this, because a lot of these sea creatures are just massive in CMC, and so we want to get a payoff, right, for them. So what are we trying to do? We're going to ramp up. We're going to use our first few turns to hopefully ramp up. And then once we start casting our big Leviathans, hopefully we're going to, or creatures, Krakens, what have you, or sea monsters, we're going to hopefully cascade back down into some mana dorks, into some mana doublers, into some things that are going to help us continue to push our mana forward. We're playing a couple overruns to end the game. But honestly, there's a lot of serpents, a lot of these sea monsters that just have great effects, bouncing other creatures back to their hands, making it so that you're sea monsters are only blockable by other sea monsters. We have things like Spawning Kraken that just make a ton of tokens whenever you attack. I like this sea monster style because they're big blue creatures that get paid off really well. And that's really what we're trying to do in essence. I think Kiora's a great commander for it because giving us that cascade's great. Having Ward 3 means your opponent's going to have to board wipe this out of the way, because even for a 1 mana removal spell, that's 4 mana in order to take Kiora down. But Kiora, of course, one of my favorite characters in Magic for a long time, being from Zendikar, one of my favorite planes of all time. Kiora then goes to Theros, steals the Bident from Thassa and brings it back to Zendikar and uses it as her weapon. So Kiora's pretty cool, and I like to see the next iteration of Kiora kind of in her in the stages of her story. I thought about playing all of the Kiora Planeswalker cards, but we only played the Behemoth Beckoner just because it kind of gives us that elemental bond type effect in the deck. But that's it. We're gonna play big boys. We're gonna stomp it just like any green deck should, and that's how we're going to do it. So if you do not want to see the card by card stuff, if you don't want to see some of the nitty gritty, there's going to be a deck list down in the description. Go ahead and check it out. Otherwise, let's rock through the deck. Let's talk about some of the fun things we get to find when it comes to this deck and some of the cool cards that I'm excited to play with. Pretty basic mana base here. I will note this time I tried to go a little bit more budget than normal. Normally, I don't really care about budget. This time I try to just keep it low, and a lot of it helps because a lot of the sea monsters are not very expensive. So it's pretty easy to stick on the budget when you're not playing a lot of creatures that are terra expensive. It does certainly help. Getting into the enchantments, we've got a couple really important ones. Mana Reflection and Zendikar Resurgent are just going to help us get more mana out of our lands and out of our permanents. This is going to help us get up a little bit faster, but hopefully these are things we get to cascade into. Like we play a big 8 or 9, CMC sea monster, and we cascade into this, and then our next turn gets even better. And then Concordant Crossroads, we're going to potentially have a turn where we get to put a couple sea monsters down, and something like Concordant Crossroads is just going to make it so all those can attack immediately and start stomping over our opponents. It's going to become important, and we need to do it. Fertile Ground for a little bit of ramp. Garruk's Uprising. I love Garruk's Uprising in a deck like this because it plays twofold. One, it's the elemental bond type effect where when a creature with power 4 or greater comes in, we draw a card. It's just about every creature in our deck, or at least every sea monster in our deck has 4 or greater. All of them get trampled, so now they're going to be even harder to block. And then whenever it comes in, if we have one before or greater, we draw a card. So lots of chances. Love a card like this. All-Star Enchantment. We see Kiora Best the Sea God, of course, fits well because we get that 8/8 Kraken off the one. But number 2 just taps everything down from target opponent. That could get them out of the way for our attacks, or just tap down an opponent that we're worried about. And then on the 3, we get an opponent that a permanent someone controls and gain control of it. So I like this kind of card. This is kind of the card, again, we want to cascade into, not from, right? Because we only cascade from sea monster spells. So this is the perfect thing we'd want to cascade back into. Quest for Ula's Temple is a card that sees a lot of play in the sea monster decks because of its ability. This is the beginning of your upkeep. You may look at the top card. If it's a creature card, you can reveal it and put a counter on it. And then it says at the beginning of each end step, if there are 3 or more quest counters on Quest for Ruler's Temple, you may put a Kraken, Leviathan, Octopi, or Serpent from your hand onto the battlefield. So this is a way for us to cheat in some of them if we want to, if we don't want to cast all of them. What this is kind of good for is on our opponent's turns, we could be putting them down and setting up kind of a big alpha strike or something on our turn to help end the game. So I like that. Tribute to the World Tree, new card from March of the Machine. Fits perfect here. It's just going to draw us the card more often than not. But this is another great thing to cascade into. And then Wild Growth. So Wild Growth and Fertile Ground for a little more rampage. Come up into the artifacts. You'll notice a lot of them are mana artifacts. Arcane Signet, Decanter, Skyclave Relic, Soul Ring, Great Henge. All of them are mana artifacts. Great Henge, of course, has the bonus ability of drawing us a card when a creature, non-token creature comes in. Cool part about that is if we cascade off of one of our sea monsters and we get another sea monster, that's just going to net us another card out of it, which is great. More cards in our hand, more stuff to do. Crystal Ball lets us scry 2 for 1 mana. This is going to help because before we cast that sea monster, we can look and see what's on top. I think the Sensei Top's going to do the same thing. Look at the top 3. Crystal Ball, look at the top 2. See if we can find something that's what we want, that's less than the thing we're about to cast. Get it on to the stack. Now, both of these are instant speed abilities. We can do them in response to casting the spell and Kiora's trigger going onto the stack. So we don't have to do it right away if we don't want to, like completely telegraph what our plan is right away. We could do that, but I do like both of them. Now, the nice part about Sensei's Divining Top is we can use this more than once a turn, whereas that Crystal Ball we can only use once a turn, right? Because it taps. So this is the nice thing about Top. And so we can kind of have some fun and look at those top cards and try to maneuver them around for us to find that cascade that we really want. Getting into the spells, the instance, it's just really a lot of removal. Beast Within, Nature's Claim, Rapid Hybrid, and Reality Shift sit as our removal. Brainstorm for a little bit of draw, Growth Spiral for a little bit of ramp, Heroic Intervention for some protection. We're playing the Mystical Tutor because there are things like Overwhelming Stampede and Triumph that we're going to want to get at some point to help us win the game. Worldly Tutor can actually help us seat a card on top of our deck to cascade into, so that becomes really good. That can help us out there. Getting into the sorceries, of course, Cultivate, Farseek, Nature's Lore, Ramp, and Growth. 3 visits, lots of ramp. We want that ramp low as possible on the grid. I actually took out Kadama's Rage. I hidden in there as well to add some of the enchantments as well, just so that we kind of diversify some of our ramp. Overwhelming Stampede and Triumph are our overrun finishers, and then Whelming Wave will actually return all creatures that aren't sea monsters back to their opponent's hands. This is actually another, or owner's hands. This is actually another way to help us kind of overrun our opponents, because most of the things are going to go back to their hand. No, Kiora is not a either any of those sea monster types, so it will go back to our hand. But I think that's okay if we already have a board full of sea monsters. I don't think we mind putting the rest of them back to hand. Just playing 1 Planeswalker and Kiora Behemoth back on our 7 loyalty for 3 mana. Whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under our control, we draw a card. So there's another copy of its Elemental Bond effect that becomes so important when you're playing these massive creatures. And then -1 to untap target permanent. This could untap a lot of fun things. Hopefully, our mana dorks like Orchid and some of these other ones, or just untap a land, or it could just untap a creature that attacked and have it untap to block. First, we're going to talk about the creatures that aren't sea monsters, and then we'll talk about the creatures that are sea monsters. So first up, we have Gwenna. Eyes of Gaia, taps to add any 2-mana name combination to colors, only to activate creature abilities or cast creature spells. And then when you cast a creature with power 5 or greater, put a counter on it and tap it. This is kind of great because this could potentially help us cast more than 1 sea monster a turn by getting untapped. Emoti, Celebrant of Bounty, everything 6 or greater has Cascade. This is kind of a secondary copy of our commander, and it's also just going to allow us to do a really good job. The other nice thing about this is this will turn the Great Henge and Zendikar Resurgent and to get them Cascade as well, whereas Kiora wouldn't give it to it. But I still think that's okay. I think Emoti fits as a nice secondary copy of our commander in the deck that helps us out in that way. Murkfiend Liege is not part of our tribes, but it's going to buff all of our creatures, and then we get to untap them on each other players' untap steps. So we get to attack more or less for free, right? Almost like we have Vigilance, and we're going to untap them. Our opponent's turns and be able to block with them. Nezahal, the Primal Tide, it can't be countered. You have no maximum hand size. Whenever our opponent casts a non-creature spell, we draw a card and we can discard 3 cards to bring it back. It's not a sea monster, but it's just a very good creature, and that extra draw is actually pretty nice. And the no maximum hand size is going to help us a ton, especially if we have to get things bounced back to hand or we want to just try to maneuver our turns a little bit better. Runati, Behemoth Caller. Again, taps for mana, but it says that whenever you cast a creature spell with CMC 5 or greater, that creature enters the battlefield with X additional +1/+1 counters on it, where X is that mana value -4, and the creatures you control with 3 or more +1/+1 counters on them with haste. So this is another haste enabler. As long as we get it out early, you can give our big Serpents haste. Most of our Serpents sit between 7 and 9 mana, so most of them with Runati are going to come out with haste, which is going to be helpful. Savala. Green and tap, get X mana, where X is the greatest power among creatures we control. So this hopefully taps for a lot of mana. And then anytime a creature comes in, if it has the highest power among any creature, that player that cast it draws a card. So this is going to potentially help us draw cards because a lot of our Serpents are massive. So that's going to help as well. And then Tatiova. Tatiova is mainly in here because we need a way to get through some of our deck, get our important pieces. And I think we're already trying to play lands anyway, right? We're already trying to ramp anyway, so Tatiova is going to help us do it. Worst case scenario, this is just going to gain us some life, draw some cards, and kind of keep us in the race as we push ourselves towards our goal. Now let's get into the sea monsters, because that's where we're playing Kiora. We're playing Kiora for the sea monsters. First up, AC Tyrant of Gyre Strait. Play an additional land in each of our turns, and then whenever a land enters battlefield under control, we draw a card. Again, helps us churn through our deck, find the things we need. Orlickmacee's Slumbering Isle taps for mana. When it first comes down, it's a land until you get rid of its 5 slumber counters. So whenever you cast a spell, you remove the slumber counter. And then once it gets rid of all the slumber counters, then it's a 12/12 Kraken. So I love Orlickmacee's because it starts as a land that taps for 2 mana, and then it gets up to a massive 12/12 creature. Now, the great part about Kiora is it's a cast, so it will count for all of those casting things as well. So for things like Gwenna, if we put a big Kraken on the stack and then Cascade, Gwenna will see the second one as well as a cast. So that's really nice as well. Brineland, the Moon Kraken, whenever it or enters battlefield, or whenever you cast a spell with CMC 6 or greater, you can return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Brineland is a card that I really love in my Emoti list, my Emoti Cascade list, because it does a really good job. Just start bouncing your opponent's things back to your hand, get them out of the way, disrupt their strategy. Deep Sea Kraken, 10 mana, 6/6. We can suspend 9. For 2 and a blue, so we can suspend it with 9 time counters on it. It'll automatically lose one at the beginning of our upkeep, or it says it loses one every time our opponents cast a spell. So we can do that, and it'll actually cast when it comes off the suspend, and it'll still count as a 10 CMC spell, even though we only paid it for 3. So that's kind of great with Kiora's effect, because we could suspend this early, get Kiora down, and then when that final time counter comes off, we get to Cascade with Kiora for it. Elder Deep Fiend, 8 mana, 5/6 flash, emerge, so we can sack a creature and pay the difference that that creature's CMC gets subtracted from that emerge cost, and we pay the difference. And whenever we cast it, tap up to 4 target permanents. This could also help us truly just tap things down and get a good attack in as well. Hullbreaker Horror, probably one of my favorites of the pair here, is that it is a Kraken. Whenever you cast a spell, you can either return target creature you don't control, return target spell you don't control to its owner's hand, or return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So we start bouncing things back to our opponent's hand, or if our opponent casts a big spell and we don't like it, we could play an instant or something like that on their turn and actually bounce that spell from the stack back to their hand. So it's almost as good as countering it if our opponent doesn't have that much mana left. Inkwell Leviathan, 9 mana, 7/11 with Trample and Island Walk and Shroud, big boy. And again, that 9 mana is great for that Cascade. Coma, Cosmos Serpent, one of my favorite of the sea monsters. Of course, has to see play in the deck. Beginning your upkeep, we make a 3/3 Serpent creature token, and then we can sack a Serpent to either tap target permanent, and its activated abilities can't be activated, or give it indestructible. What's great about Coma is you get that 3/3 every turn, so you just stack those up, and then you use them when you need them to shut things down before combat, or just make it generally hard to deal with. Lorthos, the Tide Master, whenever it attacks, we can pay 8. If we do, tap up to 8 target permanents, and they don't untap. This can punish a lot of great things and keep those creatures locked down, keep mana dorks or mana rocks tapped down. I like Lorthos. It's a lot of mana to start. It's a lot of mana to use that ability, but I think in the right situation, we have so much mana. If our mana's getting doubled, if we have extras of it, it's going to come in handy. Nadir Kraken seems kind of fun. Whenever we draw a card, we can pay 1. If we do, we put a counter on it and make a little tentacle creature token. Go wide, give us some blockers, make this bigger. I like Nadir Kraken. It seems like a cool little card for this. Nimbus Swimmer is a Leviathan. Just an X green blue flyer. So the more mana we put into it, the bigger it becomes, and the better our Kiora-Cascade becomes. Octavia, Living Thesis, is a 10 mana 8/8 elemental octopus. It says whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, target creature has base power and toughness 8/8 until end of turn. It costs 8 less if we have 8 or more instant or sorceries in our graveyard, but I doubt that's going to happen. We're probably going to have to pay more or less full price for this, but it is 10, which is going to cascade into literally probably everything else in our deck. So I don't think we mind that. And that has Ward 8, so it's tough to get through as well. Reservoir Kraken can give us some little fish tokens that our opponents don't want it to attack, but it's a good 4 mana 6/6 body, so it's just going to be tougher to deal with in combat, but most of the time it's just going to get tapped down and we get extra blockers. I'm sorry, they can't be blocked, so just extra attackers that our opponents have to deal with. Scourge of Fleets, whenever it enters the battlefield, turn each creature your opponents control toughness X or less, or X is the number of islands you control. So the more islands we have, the more things get bounced back. This is one of those great ones to cascade into. Hopefully it kind of paves the way for our attackers, right? Gets us in there for what we need to get into. Serpent of Yawning Depths. Krakens, Leviathans, Octopi, and Serpents you control can't be blocked except by Krakens, Leviathans, Octopi, and Serpents. This is one of our best ones. This coming down will probably mean that everything we have is going to get in unblocked, and this is going to make it very tough for our opponents unless they have them. This is one of those cards that we want to try to find if we can. Get it down when we can and get in there with all of our big guys and get the game over with. Shipwrecker Kraken, when it becomes monstrous, you can do it as long as there's no... As long as it hadn't become monstrous, yes, we can do this once. So once per time it's in the battlefield. When it becomes monstrous, tap up to 4 target creatures. Those creatures don't untap. And they're untapped steps for as long as you control it. It's a big 6/6, and then for 8 mana, we can do that. So I like it. 6/6 is a good body, and that's a great upside if we have the mana. Simic Sky Swallower is 7 mana 6/6, just flying trample again. I like being able to get trample on these big guys, especially whether they are or not. It's just very helpful. And it's going to hurt our opponents to block it with how big it is. Slim Vote is kind of interesting. Whenever it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, return all creatures to their owner's hands except for merfolk, Krakens, Leviathans, Octopi, and Serpents. This is kind of cool because this won't bounce our commander, because of course Kiora is a merfolk, but this will, again, keep our sea monsters down, bounce all our opponents' things. I like it. It's a big 8/8 body, and then if we want to pay the 2 extra, we can get this big bounce effect that we already have on some of our other Krakens. Spawning Kraken, probably one of my favorites. Whenever a Kraken, Leviathan, Octopi, or Serpent you control deals combat damage to a player, create a 9/9 Kraken creature token. This is great because you just attack anything that hits, you have a free 9/9 blocker to block with. I love Spawning Kraken, and it doesn't even have to attack itself. Everything else can attack and still reap the benefits. Stormtide Leviathan, 8 mana 8/8 Island Walk. All lands are island in addition to their other types, and then creatures without flying or Island Walk can attack. So we have to be careful with Stormtide Leviathan because not all of our serpents have, or not all of our sea monsters have Island Walk, and not all of our sea monsters have flying. But what this will do is probably completely shut down most of our opponents, which is not bad at the end of the day. If we're pretty close to ending a game, this is going to help us do it. This card seems kind of interesting, a common from CLB, but it's got a cool effect. For 1 and a blue, we can just bounce up into somebody's hand, or for 7 mana, we get a 6/6 that can't be blocked as long as you cast a non-creature spell this turn, which seems pretty relevant. The bigger this thing gets, or if we've already used an overrun, that might potentially mean a lot of damage to somebody. Thrix is not in here because it's a sea monster, but it's in here because it reduces everything that's 5 or greater by 1 and can't be countered. So it just gets better. This is another card that sees play in my Emoti deck that I think fits really well here because it's going to protect our big spells no matter what they are, and they can't be countered. And Tromokratis, our last creature, it has hexproof as long as it's attacking or blocking. And it cannot be blocked unless all creatures defending player control block it. This is great. because in some situations this can just force someone to either take the 8 or be blocked, take the 8 or completely block it with everything. And then the best part there is we can choose what actually gets damaged with Trimocratus. So I kind of like that, because someone's gonna have to say, okay, here's all my creatures, and we could pick and choose what kind of dies in combat, right, as opposed to our opponent kind of chump blocking with a little 1/1. I like that. I think it's relevant. It's not probably as relevant as some other things, but the bigger this gets, the worse that choice is going to be for our opponent. But friends, that's Kiora Sea Monsters. Man, I'm really excited. This is kind of an interesting deck. I don't know if I'll ever actually play it, but I think it's pretty cool. I've always kind of liked this Sea Monster style deck. A buddy of mine has a great Coma deck that plays a lot of these Sea Monsters and does a great job at it. But I like that we finally got this Sea Monsters Commander. We saw Kinesos out of Jumpstart 2022. I did a deck on that one, but I don't think that it did as good of a job. I like this Cascade because it benefits you from doing what you already want to do anyway, which is casting these big Sea Monsters, but it gives you the benefit of cascading into potentially more Sea Monsters or just support cards, helping you out, getting you value, and I really like that. I expected this would be a choice for people who like this style of deck but have yet to find their real commander. I think Kiora's it. Check it out. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Like if you like the video. Subscribe if you want to see some more content, and I will catch you guys next time.